The icy wind cut through the morning air as Julie tightened her threadbare coat around her shoulders. She sat on a park bench, staring at her reflection in a cracked compact mirror. The bruises of exhaustion darkened her eyes, her lips chapped from the cold. She dabbed on what little makeup she had left, smoothing the creases of her second-hand blouse, trying to look presentable, trying to look like she belonged. She turned her head slightly, glancing at the small figure curled up beneath a pile of blankets in the back seat of their rusted sedan. Her daughter, Lily, barely 6 years old, still fast asleep. Julie exhaled slowly, pressing her fingers against her temples. This interview had to go well. Her heels clicked unevenly against the pavement as she walked toward the towering glass building in Midtown Manhattan. Sterling Vogue. A name that stood for power, prestige, and exclusivity in the fashion world. Julie had spent the last 3 nights in the public library, studying the company, learning everything she could about its designs, its vision, its CEO. She squared her shoulders, rehearsing the words she had practiced in the mirror 100 times. I'm passionate about sustainable fashion. I may not have a traditional background, but I have a keen eye for detail and experience in upcycling materials. I believe fashion should be inclusive, not just for the privileged. She stepped into the lobby, the warmth of the heated marble floors immediately clashing against the chill in her bones. The receptionist barely glanced at her before instructing her to take a seat. Julie folded her hands over her lap, her breath shallow, heart thudding against her ribcage. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then 45. Finally, a sleek, well-dressed assistant approached. Ms. Sterling will see you now. Julie followed her through a series of glass-paneled offices until they arrived at a large, sunlit room with a sweeping view of the city. Behind a pristine white desk sat Madeline Sterling, CEO of Sterling Vogue. She was effortlessly elegant, draped in a custom-tailored black dress, manicured nails tapping against her tablet as she barely lifted her gaze. Julie inhaled deeply. This is my chance. Ms. Sterling, she started, offering a polite smile, thank you for taking the time to meet with me. Madeline held up a hand, cutting her off. She flipped through Julie's application, her expression unreadable, until the moment she landed on something that made her brow arch. You don't have a listed home address, Madeline remarked coolly. It's blank. Julie's stomach tightened. I've been in a transitional situation. But that doesn't reflect my ability to. Madeline smirked, shaking her head. Oh, honey. She leaned back in her chair, glancing at her assistant as if to share a private joke. You're homeless? Julie felt heat rush to her face. I'm currently between places, but Madeline let out a soft chuckle. And you think someone like you belongs in high fashion? Silence hung in the air. Julie clenched her hands beneath the table. She had anticipated skepticism. She had prepared for tough questions. But she hadn't expected outright humiliation. Madeline gestured vaguely toward Julie's outfit, the carefully pressed but undeniably worn blouse, the scuffed heels. You can't be serious, she said. You probably don't even have a place to store fabric, let alone an address to receive a paycheck. A few chuckles echoed from nearby assistants who had begun listening in. Julie swallowed hard. I have skills. I have vision. Sweetheart, Madeline cut her off, her voice dripping with condescension. People like you should know their place. The fashion industry isn't a charity. You'd be better off looking for a job that suits your situation. Maybe a shelter needs a laundress. The words hit like a slap. Julie's breath hitched, but she forced herself to stand tall. Her hands trembled at her sides. She wanted to fight back, to argue, to prove that she was more than a statistic, more than a homeless mother struggling to survive. But as Madeline turned her attention back to her tablet, already dismissing her, she realized something. This woman would never see her as anything more than invisible. Julie turned on her heel and walked out, keeping her head high. But as soon as she stepped into the elevator, the weight of humiliation crashed down on her. Her chest heaved. The walls felt like they were closing in. When she stepped outside, Lily ran toward her, bright-eyed, hopeful. "How did it go, Mommy?" Julie knelt, pulling her daughter close, swallowing the lump in her throat. "One day, baby," she whispered into Lily's hair, "they're going to wish they never laughed at me." She had nothing. No home. No savings. No safety net. But she had a fire inside her. And it was about to consume the world. Rich woman humiliates homeless mother, then karma hits hard. Julie gripped the steering wheel of her battered sedan, staring at the cracked windshield as her breath came in shallow gasps. The humiliation still burned in her veins. Madeline Sterling's voice echoed in her mind, cold and dismissive, "People like you should know their place." Lily's small fingers wrapped around hers. "Mommy, are you okay?" Julie forced herself to smile, though her throat felt tight. "I'm okay, sweetheart." But she wasn't. She was exhausted. Beaten down. Angry. She had spent months knocking on doors, applying to dozens of jobs, hoping someone would give her a chance. This was supposed to be it. Her break. And now, she had nothing. Except for the promise she had made to her daughter. She reached into the glove compartment and pulled out her sketchbook, a collection of rough designs drawn on scraps of paper, napkins, even old receipts. Designs made from repurposed materials, fabric scraps, discarded clothing. It had started as a way to distract herself from hunger, from the fear of another night parked on the side of the road. But now, these designs were all she had left. Julie exhaled, her grip tightening on the book. "They don't want to give me a chance? Fine. I'll make my own." That night, parked behind an old laundromat, she gathered every scrap of fabric she had collected over the past few months, unraveled sweaters from thrift store donation bins, leftover textile samples from factory dumpsters. She worked in the dim glow of a street lamp, her fingers numb but steady as she sewed. Piece by piece, she stitched together something new. Something defiant. The next morning, she walked into Maria's tailor shop, a small, family-run business on the edge of the city. Maria, a seamstress from Mexico, had given Julie small repair jobs in exchange for food when she first lost her apartment. Maria looked up from her sewing machine, her sharp eyes softening when she saw the bundle in Julie's arms. "Let me guess," Maria said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You need a favor." Julie hesitated. "I need a place to work. Just for a little while." Maria sighed, shaking her head. "Chica, I run a business, not a charity." "I'll work for free," Julie said quickly. "I'll help with anything, hemming, repairs, whatever you need. Just let me use the back room." Maria studied her for a long moment. "You still have that fire in you, don't you?" Julie nodded. Maria chuckled, motioning for her to follow. "Then let's see what you can do." Weeks passed. Julie spent every waking hour working, fixing hems, sewing buttons, taking in waistlines. Every spare minute, she worked on her designs. She experimented, cutting and stitching, learning from her mistakes. Lily spent her afternoons in the shop, coloring at a small table while Maria fussed over her, feeding her homemade tamales. The first dress Julie completed, a sleek, modern coat made entirely of discarded denim, caught Maria's attention. "This," Maria said, running her fingers over the seams, "is different." "Good different." Encouraged, Julie kept going. She created jackets from repurposed curtains, evening gowns from old tablecloths. She turned forgotten fabrics into something bold, something powerful. But passion wasn't enough. She needed a way to sell. One evening, as she scrolled through a borrowed phone at a library computer station, she stumbled upon a fashion influencer's TikTok video about sustainable clothing. A thought sparked. Julie didn't have a store. She didn't have connections. But she had a story. She convinced Maria's teenage nephew, Alex, to help her create an Instagram page. Revive, a brand built on the idea that everything deserves a second chance. The first post was simple, a picture of her denim coat hanging on a rack, with the caption, "Made from what others throw away." Just like me. The response was slow at first. A few likes. A couple of comments. But then, something incredible happened. A small-time fashion blogger reposted her designs. Then another. Then a sustainability advocate. Within weeks, orders started trickling in. And for the first time in years, Julie dared to believe that she and Lily might have a future. But the world wasn't done testing her yet. Late one night, after finishing a batch of custom orders, she overheard Maria on the phone in the back room. She's talented, see, but she's still homeless. You really think people will take her seriously? Julie's stomach twisted. It wasn't cruelty, it was reality. No matter how hard she worked, there would always be people who thought she didn't belong. She gritted her teeth and pushed down the doubt. She didn't need their approval. She just needed to keep proving them wrong. Julie didn't know it yet. But in 5 years, the very woman who had humiliated her would walk into her office, desperate for a job. And the world would see just how far she had come. Julie leaned against the cutting table, exhaustion pressing heavily on her shoulders. Orders were coming in faster than she could handle. The Instagram page for Revive had gained thousands of followers overnight after a well-known sustainability blogger featured her designs. She should have been ecstatic. Instead, she was overwhelmed. Her hands ached from endless stitching, her nights were spent balancing fabric costs, shipping logistics, and customer inquiries. Maria had helped where she could, but her shop wasn't built for large-scale production. Julie needed something bigger. Something permanent. A week later, she found herself in the gleaming, modern offices of Green Futures Investment Group, sitting across from a well-dressed woman with sleek blonde hair and calculating eyes. Your designs are impressive, the woman said, flipping through the portfolio Julie had laid out. Sustainable, unique, and trending. Investors are very interested in brands like yours. Julie's pulse quickened. But, the woman continued, tapping a manicured nail against the folder, you're still a risk. No formal business background, no established supply chain. And, she glanced at Julie's application form, a history of housing instability. Julie stiffened. The words were different, but the judgment was the same. People like you should know their place. For a split second, she saw herself 5 years ago, standing in Madeline Sterling's office, being told she wasn't good enough. Not this time. Julie leaned forward. I built this business from nothing. No investors. No corporate backing. Just skill, hard work, and a belief that the world needs change. If that's not enough for you, I'll find someone else. The woman arched an eyebrow but smiled. Ballsy, she mused. I like that. She slid a contract across the table. $50,000. Seed funding. Enough to scale production. But in return, we'll take a 40% stake in Revive. Julie's breath caught. 40%. Almost half. She thought about Lily. About the nights spent parked behind laundromats, rationing gas money. She looked at the contract again. Then, slowly, she pushed it back. No. The woman blinked. No? I'm not selling almost half my company for a check. I've come too far to give that much away. For a moment, silence. Then, the woman chuckled. You're either really smart or really stupid, she said, standing. I guess we'll find out. Julie stood, shaking her hand. I already know. Instead of investors, Julie turned to crowdfunding. She shared her story. The rejections. The struggles. The night she was laughed out of Sterling Vogue. The internet responded. In 1 month, Revive raised over $250,000. With the money, she secured a small manufacturing space and hired other women, many of them formerly homeless, like she once was. Revive wasn't just a brand now. It was a movement. 1 year later, Julie sat in her new downtown showroom, watching as orders from high-end boutiques poured in. She had done it. She had made it. And then, fate delivered a moment she never expected. Her assistant knocked gently on the door. "Julie, you have a walk-in applicant." Julie barely looked up. "Have HR handle it." The assistant hesitated. "I think you'll want to see this one yourself." Julie sighed, setting down her tablet. And then she saw her. Standing in the waiting area, looking older, worn, desperate, Madeline Sterling. Julie felt her breath hitch. For a second, she wasn't in her sleek office. She was back in that cold lobby, years ago, sitting on an uncomfortable chair, waiting to be judged. She stood, smoothing the fabric of her tailored blazer. "This," she murmured, "is going to be interesting." Then, she stepped forward to greet the woman who once humiliated her, now standing before her, begging for a second chance. Julie walked toward the waiting area with measured steps, her heels clicking softly against the polished floors. Madeline Sterling stood stiffly, clutching a neatly folded resume in her manicured hands, hands that now trembled ever so slightly. Her once perfectly styled hair had lost its shine, and the power suit she wore, though still tailored, no longer carried the effortless confidence it once did. Julie took a slow breath. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times. Back then, standing in that cold, glass-walled office, humiliated, powerless, she had dreamed of revenge. She had fantasized about seeing Madeline brought down to nothing, just as she had been. And now, here she was. Madeline finally looked up, her sharp blue eyes meeting Julie's for the first time. Recognition didn't come immediately. Not yet. Julie let the silence stretch, watching the older woman shift uncomfortably before finally speaking. "I'm here for the marketing director position," Madeline said, her voice controlled, but lacking the steel it once carried. Julie tilted her head slightly. "I see." She took the resume from Madeline's hands, flipping through it with deliberate slowness. It was impressive, of course it was. Decades of experience, major campaigns, high-profile clients. Yet at the very top of the page, something stood out. Her last position had ended 3 years ago. Julie's gaze flickered back up. "You've been out of work for a while," she noted. Madeline's jaw tensed. The industry changed. After Sterling Vogue closed, opportunities were harder to come by. Julie nodded, watching the cracks appear in the woman's carefully controlled facade. She knew exactly why Sterling Vogue had collapsed. The world had evolved. Sustainable fashion, ethical production, and inclusivity were no longer niche concepts, they were the future. The very things Madeline had dismissed were now the industry standard. Julie set the resume down. "And why revive?" she asked. Madeline hesitated. Then, in a tone that lacked its former arrogance, she admitted, "Because you're leading the kind of company that's thriving in today's market. Because I need work. And because I believe I have something to offer." Julie leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. So this was it. Madeline Sterling, the woman who once laughed at her for being homeless, now needed a job from her. The poetic justice was almost too perfect. A slow, quiet power unfurled inside Julie. She could end this woman's career in one sentence. She could humiliate her. Tell her she wasn't the right fit. Tell her she wasn't good enough. And yet. Julie exhaled, glancing down at her own hands. Hands that had once trembled in humiliation, just like Madeline's were trembling now. Hands that had stitched together a future from scraps. She thought of Lily. Thought of the promise she had made to her daughter all those years ago. To build, not destroy. She looked Madeline straight in the eye. "I think you're not the right fit for this role." Silence. Madeline's lips parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected the rejection to come so swiftly. Julie let the words hang in the air, just long enough to let her feel their weight, just as she had once felt them. Then, she reached into a drawer, pulled out a small black box, and slid it across the desk. Madeline hesitated before opening it. Inside lay a Revive label, stitched into the lining of a familiar piece of fabric. A jacket, crafted from discarded designer materials. For the first time, Madeline truly saw it. The company. The designs. The world Julie had built. Out of things the industry had thrown away. Out of people they had deemed unworthy. Madeline Sterling, once an untouchable name in high fashion, had become just another thing the world discarded. Julie met her gaze. "You told me people like me don't belong in fashion," she said softly. "That I should know my place." She leaned forward. "This is my place." Madeline swallowed hard, her face unreadable. Julie watched her for a long moment before speaking again, her voice softer this time. "You're not the right fit for this role," she repeated, then added, "but there's something else." Madeline blinked. "We have a mentorship program," Julie continued. "It helps women who've been pushed out of the workforce reinvent themselves. It's not glamorous. It's not executive level. But it's a fresh start." Madeline's eyes flickered with something unreadable, pride, resentment, maybe even relief. A pause. Then, slowly, she nodded. Julie extended her hand. And this time, Madeline Sterling was the one who had to take it. That evening, as Julie walked out of the office, Lily ran toward her, beaming. "How was your day, Mommy?" Julie knelt, brushing a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "Good," she said, smiling. "It was a good day." She glanced up at the city skyline, where Revive's neon sign glowed brightly against the night. She had built this. Not out of revenge. But out of resilience. This story is more than just about karma, it's about resilience, second chances, and proving that where you come from does not define where you're going. Julie could have chosen revenge, but instead, she showed true power by rising above her past and giving someone else the chance to change. It reminds us that success is the greatest answer to those who doubt us. But what do you think? Do you believe Madeline deserved a second chance, or should Julie have turned her away? Comment your thoughts below. Type 2 if you liked the story, or 7 if you didn't. And if you enjoy stories like this, hit the like button and subscribe to True Tales for more powerful true stories every day. Natalie will be here to bring you more inspiring and thought-provoking stories, so make sure to stay tuned.